How's it going, everyone? Grim here with another video. This time I want to give even more of my 2 cents on the hot topic of Warhammer 40K 10th edition. Games Workshop has been spoon-feeding us tidbits of information on how 10th differs from 9th, and some of those morsels are tasty. Today, specifically, let's talk about the toughness of vehicles in 40K 10th edition. This is the Warhammer Community website's article dated 13 April 2023 on the upcoming 10th edition rules for the toughness factor of vehicles. Dubbed the new 40K, Games Workshop is doing a great marketing campaign for and capitalizing on the advent of 10th edition. There is a slew of articles on Warhammer Community, and more are being published on the various aspects of the tabletop game and what changes we should all expect for the new 40K. There are few things in the 41st millennium as terrifying as a headlong assault by waves of heavily armored tanks, which is why forces like the Astra Militarum love them so much. But recently, armored vehicles have been struggling to keep up with the relentless firepower the average Warhammer 40,000 army can throw around. So, one major focus in the new edition has been to make those units that should feel tough more meaningfully durable. And that mentality starts with the tanks. The opening paragraphs of the article. And then you have this wonderful picture of an Imperial Guard army. Several Lords of War tanks, Leman Russes, basilisks, a manticore, a chimera or two, and tons of troops. So right off the bat, I'm calling GW out on this intro. It is, in my opinion, complete rubbish. Basically, they're saying tanks don't really feel like tanks in 9th edition. Too many factions are too strong in their anti-armor firepower, thereby making tanks not as awesome as they should be. So, we're going to fix this problem in 10th edition. That's pretty much what GW is saying to us. Hello, GW, if this is a problem, you caused it. Your endless power creep made armies stronger and stronger with each codex release, and tanks therefore became in comparison weaker and weaker. The example I put forth is this, ladies and gentlemen. The Tau Hammerhead Gunship's Railgun. A 145 point unit, it shoots a heavy 1, strength 14, AP -6 shot that deals D3 plus 6 damage plus 3 mortal wounds. The Tau have ways of ensuring this one shot will almost always hit, and at S14, it'll always wound, dealing 10 to 12 damage. 12 damage. That could remove an Armiger from the battlefield, for crying out loud. An Armiger is a Lord of War. Granted, it's a small Lord of War, but still, it's a Lord of War. A giant walking behemoth that is basically armor and guns. And a hammerhead can take it out in one shot, all for 145 points? It wasn't always like this. The railgun didn't start off in 9th edition this powerful. GW gave it a little tap with the Power Creep wand halfway through the edition when they released the new Tau Codex. Here's an idea, GW. If you want to make tanks feel more tanky, then don't do power creep. Now some of you may be listening to my rant and say, all right, Graham, calm down. Yes, it's true. Tanks are not really tough in 9th edition. We agree with GW on that. All GW is doing is acknowledging this and wants to do right by making them tough again in 10th edition. Okay, if you're thinking that, if you're saying that, you're right. GW is trying to do right by this, right? They understand that tanks do not feel as tanky as they should. and the promise of tanks and vehicles by extension feeling more durable, more tough in 10th edition, that's a good promise. But let's continue with the article to see how they plan to bring back the capital T in tank. So, as the article continues, we're treated to the datasheet of the Rhino, a 40k staple. The Rhino's toughness is going to be increased from 7 to 9. This is amazeballs. At first glance, an increase of only 2 points doesn't seem that great, but it is. For those of you who didn't get the memo, in 9th edition, strength and toughness are intimately intertwined, like a sex position taken out of the Kama Sutra. Because of the D6 dice system, a change to one can greatly impact the other. Let's recap the wounding process. If strength equals toughness, the attacker wounds on a 4+. That means if S equals T, you have a 50-50 chance of wounding. Roll a 1, 2, or 3, you don't wound. Roll a 4, 5, or 6, you do wound. If S is greater than T, even by just 1 point, your chances of wounding drastically increase from 50% to 66%. If S is twice T or greater, wounding increases to 83%. For a D6 die system, the only thing greater than 83% is 100%. And there's no such thing as a 100% chance to do anything in 40k, because a die roll of 1 always fails, no matter what. That's in the rules. So, 83% is as good as it gets. Remember the Tau Hammerhead Railgun I talked about earlier? In 9th, Strength 14 means it has the best chances of wounding a Rhino or any other Strength 7 unit. If GW made it Strength 13, those chances drop to 66%. Most vehicles are Toughness 7 or below. The really tough vehicles, aka the actual tanks, are T8 or higher. A Lehman Russ, the standard issue poster child tank of the Astra Militarum, is T8. Hell, even a Warhound Titan, as in the big ass Titan Legion Lord of War Warhound Titan, is only T8. And guess what? With power creep in 9th, even T8 isn't all that good anymore. The armor on a Warhound Titan isn't all that good, considering it's a big ass Titan Legion unit. It should be. But by the game mechanics of 9th edition, it's kinda not. So when GW increases the Rhino's toughness to 9, it's basically saying almost no one will be able to have an 83% chance of wounding. The best most will be able to do is 66%. That is significant. Oh, and by the way, Rhinos will now be able to heal 1 wound per turn. It's even more tough. But I can't help but wonder if that's a bit overkill. I mean, it's a Rhino. It's not really a tank. It's an armored transport. It's definitely supposed to be tougher than the troops that it transports, but no transport should be as tough as a tank. I think most people agree to that. If you look at it that way, the original T7 seems correct. A hammerhead is a gunship. Its role is to deal damage, and it makes sense that against a troop transport, even an armored troop transport, it'll have maximum chance of wounding, the 83% thing. Making the Rhino T9 is too much. I mean, if the Rhino is T9, can you imagine how tough actual tanks are going to be in 10th edition? Oh wait, you don't have to imagine, because they give us 3 more vehicle data sheets in this article. The Stormspeeder is also going to be T9. The Stormspeeder is a vehicle designed to be fast, and usually you're supposed to trade durability for speed. I mean, it's basically a Corvette, you know, where the people inside are exposed. It's open cockpit here. How the hell is that supposed to be T9? The same as a fully enclosed, up-armored Rhino? The Gladiator and the Repulsor, both tanks, kind of, are T10 and T12 respectively. In 9th, they're both T8. But really, the Gladiator is an actual tank, while the Repulsor is actually a transport. A transport with the same firepower as a tank, mind you, but a transport. So why is it more tough than the Gladiator, which is a tank in every sense of the word? In 9th, they had the same armor. In 10th, the Repulsor will be 2 points tougher than the Gladiator. I'm getting confused by this fuzzy logic, GW. So clearly, it is not going to be the case where every vehicle's toughness simply increases by 2, right? Like the Rhino going from T7 to T9. The Repulsor is being increased by 4. And it doesn't seem to be the case that a vehicle's toughness will be based on any kind of common sense either. I mean, a Storm Speeder with T9? Really? I don't get it. Before we move on, I want to circle back to the Rhino datasheet. Look at the first ranged weapon there, the Hunter-Killer Missile. Again, another 40k staple. In 10th, they'll have a strength of 14. Currently, in 9th edition, its strength is S10. Why in the world, GW, would you put forth the argument that increasing the toughness of vehicles will solve the problem of tanks being too weak, and then commensurately increase the strength of anti-armor weapons? In 9th, an S10 missile will wound a T7 Rhino 66% of the time. In 10th, an S14 missile will wound a T9 Rhino, guess what? 66% of the time. It's the same damn thing. Where's the difference? How is that making vehicles tougher? Oh, and another thing. If you look at this datasheet, something is peculiarly missing. The transport capacity. If you watched my previous video on transports, I gave a little rant about transport capacity. In the Warhammer Community article on transports, it shows that the Repulsor will now have a capacity of 12 Astartes. I mean, that was part of the Repulsor's datasheet. But if you look at this Rhino's datasheet, there's nothing about transport capacity. How come? Is it because the 12 infantry capacity thing will be for all vehicles with the transport keyword? Is it because GW just hasn't decided on the capacity of the Rhino yet? Therefore, the datasheet they gave in the article is missing it? Or is it because the whole thing is a huge conspiracy? Honestly though, I don't get it. I don't understand the whole transport capacity thing in 10th edition yet, based on these two articles. Certainly, it cannot be the case that all vehicles with the transport keyword now has a capacity of 12. I'm sure that's not what the Repulsor data sheet in the transport article was talking about. That must have been just for the Repulsor. My bet is that the Rhino datasheet, as shown here, hasn't been finalized yet. But if that's the case, does that mean none of these datasheets, stat blocks, rules, special abilities shown about these units in any of these articles have been finalized? Does that mean that GW can change what's being shown in these articles in the released edition? Yeah, it could mean that. And that's a problem. Anyway, let's get back on track before I have an aneurysm. The article goes on to talk about the OC, or Objective Control, of vehicles. There's a beautiful picture of an all-vehicle ultramarine force, kind of like a spearhead detachment, but we know that in 10th edition there will be no such thing as a spearheaded detachment, so I don't know what exactly it is in 10th edition, just a regular detachment, but nonetheless, it is a nice picture, real nice. Give your painters a pay raise. Anyway, every unit will now have an OC number, even vehicles. OC is what's replacing OBSEC. So it will no longer be the case that units either have OBSEC or don't have OBSEC, but instead all units will have an OC number, and some may even have OC equals 0. Speculation is that units that currently have OBSEC will have maybe OC2, while normal units will have OC1, like an Intercessor versus a Terminator. But in 10th, vehicles which normally do not have OBSEC in 9th edition will have an OC number. The article talks about how a vehicle can muscle the opponent's infantry off an objective, for example. And to me, that makes perfect sense. In the real world, a tank is more than a match for an infantry squad, unless that infantry squad has anti-tank weaponry. But let's say they don't. Let's say it's just a normal rifle unit. If so, then there's no way a squad of infantry would try to take on a tank by themselves. Suicide. That squad needs to take a hill or an objective, and there's a tank parked on top of it. In the real world, that squad would be radioing their higher command and requesting some anti-armor support. They would definitely not run up to the tank and declare that they now have control of the hill with the enemy tank still sitting there. But that's how 9th edition plays. An infantry unit with OBSEC versus a tank, the infantry unit controls the objective. So giving vehicles the ability to secure an objective, to control it, makes sense. What doesn't make sense to me is the numbers in the sample data sheets in the article. Why does a gladiator have the same OC amount as 3 troops? So a tank is equal to 3 people when it comes to controlling an objective? That doesn't make sense. The OC should be at least like 10 or 20 or something, right? I mean, it's a tank. And why is the OC greater for a repulsor? It's a troop transport. Now, there's going to be troops embarked on it. Yeah, I guess so. But a repulsor on an objective has an OC5, and then you disembark the troops. They'll give it an extra OC12 or OC24, depending on if the troops have OC2, like how the speculation goes. Again, this seems like arbitrary fuzzy logic on assigning these OC numbers to these vehicles. I'm not understanding it. Now, the last thing that the article talks about is degrading profiles. Basically, that's kind of halfway going away. All right, we're not really going to have degrading profiles anymore. Instead, there's just going to be a penalty to hit as their wounds go down. So most vehicles in 9th edition have degrading profiles, or at least many of them do. All of the walkers and the lords of war, they all have degrading profiles. As their wound count goes down, their shooting, their movement, their attacks all get decreased. Now, in 10th, as their wounds go down, vehicles will still have their full movement and melee attacks. That's cool from a game-wise perspective, but I don't think they needed to change this. In 9th edition, it made more sense to me that models degrade as they get more and more wounded. The more a tank gets hit, the less it can travel because the tracks on the left side are damaged. The tank doesn't shoot as accurately because the targeting system was destroyed the last time the enemy hit it, etc. Stuff like that, right? Degrading profiles make sense. Changing this in 10th edition doesn't. But what are your thoughts on this? Is increasing toughness on vehicles the solution to making them more durable and feel more relevant in 10th edition? I don't think it's the best solution. Is it merely the mad rant of someone who's too grim and too dark? Or is there a flicker of truth to what I'm saying? Leave a comment. Sharing is caring. Thank you all so much for watching this video. If you liked it, please give me a thumbs up and subscribe. If you didn't like it, please give me a thumbs up and subscribe. Thank you again for joining me. Grim out.